Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this streaming podcast that we have, this webinar that we have today. Our topic is going to be a very interesting one. It's all about how do we look at threat modeling and how do we merge that with DevSecOps. There's a lot of material that we want to unpack here, and we invite all of you to please, who are joining us, feel free, add your comments. We'd love to hear from you. Let's make this very, very interactive. And I think before we get started, it makes sense for us to go around the table and just do a brief introduction. So I'm going to start, first of all, Simone, if you can introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you very much, Altaz, and thank you for having me here. I'm Simone Curzi, Principal Consultant from Microsoft Services, with many years, more than 10 years, I will say, practicing threat modeling at the various levels for a lot of customers. I'm also the author of a threat modeling tool called Threats Manager Studio, and I'm happy to have this conversation with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Simone. And Hassan, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Absolutely. Thanks, Altez. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, where you are. So because we are becoming a world developers for organizations. I'm Hassan Yassar, and I'm working for Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute as a technical director, so focusing on helping the DevSecOps and Agile groups and supporting various other organizations, industry as well. And I'm a faculty member as well under CS department. I have been teaching DevOps and software security courses last almost 7-8 years. It's a really challenging problem we're going to talk about today, which I have been hearing a lot every classes I have been teaching. You are talking a lot of DevOps, but how can we do this? How can we do that? So I'm hoping to get some great discussion with all of you today and solving that problem as much as we can.
Wonderful. Sounds good. And Lotfi, if you can introduce yourself as well, please.
Good day, good morning here in US, and good day everywhere in the world. My name is Lotfi Ben Othman. I have been a faculty at Iowa State University and now at the University of North Texas. I teach and I do research on software security, and I worked a lot for the last 10 years on threat modeling and on DevOps. Thank you, Altes, for the invitation to participate in this webinar. I'm pleased to be part of this panel discussion. Thank you, guys.
Wonderful. And folks, my name is Altaz. So I'm the Insights Research Director at Security Compass. And my focus is really exactly what you see in front of you. A lot of collaboration, talking to the industry folks, participating with academia, trying to bring all this stuff together. So let's go ahead and get started. The way we're going to do this discussion today is I've got a spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, we'll go in and we'll start to fill out what we see in terms of the challenges with integrating threat modeling with DevOps, DevSecOps, and then what are some actionable steps. So let's keep this practical. Let's talk about things, and I invite our panelists, even if they would like to share their screens, by all means, we can certainly do that. And I think what I'd like to do is let's go ahead and open this up initially. And I'd like to ask you, perhaps, Hassan, from your perspective, what are you seeing? Your team is heavily involved in the DevSecOps space. You do a lot of research. Can you describe from your perspective what you see are some of the challenges that we have today in the area of DevSecOps and threat modeling?
Sure, I will get a couple of them. I'm sure we'll add more.
Yeah.
But biggest challenge that I have been seeing so far, when DevOps or DevSecOps in an organization, it doesn't matter the organization size and complexity. Usually threat modeling, it is done as a siloed activities. First challenge is silo. A group of people or group of organization team member are doing a silo threat modeling. So what that really means, again, it's not really aligned with their DevOps or DevSecOps practice. It's not really aligned with their DevOps environment. The first challenge, silo. Second one I would like to add it here, it is more static things they do threat model, like try to get everything upfront as beginning as possible, which is a static. It is contradicting with the DevOps pipeline concept because we are doing automation. So it is more static. Mm-hmm. Then third one I will edit here. I'm going to leave a couple of them to Lotfi and Simone. The third one is we are trying to get a threat model for a complex or a complete system at the beginning. We're not really doing the agile mindset because in the DevOps world, We are working more of the feature base. We are looking for more sprint. We are looking for more shippable product. We call about our typical stories, typical Scrum methodology we use. We are not able to connect what the threat modeling looks like for shippable product. So there is no agility in the process. I know we are trying to do something, but somehow the model that we are trying to create, it may not reflect the current architecture, current mitigation, current threat, or maybe beyond. So there's a disconnect over there. So I'm going to stop here and then hand over a couple other challenges we may hear from others.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. So, Simone, you want to add your thoughts to this as well?
Well, I totally agree. If I think about how threat modeling has been done in the past years, the activity has been done in a lot of cases as a review activity to analyze the system as soon as it was ready, essentially, to go in production. And this is not what it really where it really excels. In a lot of situations, when it is done during the project development, the activity, the threat model, doesn't really integrate with the pace of the project. Instead, it must be designed as part of it. If we consider the Microsoft development methodology, Microsoft Secure Development Lifecycle, it has the characteristic of being integrated, being declined on the specific methodology. So the most known approach for Microsoft SDL is the waterfall one. But there is also an alternative approach, which is for agile methodologies. And this involves the adoption of threat modeling during all the various iterations of the development process. So this is something that already a lot of time ago started to become a need, a clear need to be addressed. But still, it's not enough. It's not enough because, threat modeling needs to provide the value that is required by the specific development methodology in a way that is in line with that development methodology, and not the other way around, like sometimes happens. So when we're talking about DevOps, we needed to ensure that threat modeling is part of the DevOps process. And this has been something where we have struggled. How can you do a threat model, identify threats, mitigations, and then take that and bring that inside the backlog, which is the main way to represent, to store, to represent what needs to be done. And this is a completely different approach. It's about focusing not on our nice word as security people, but trying to make an effort and understand what is really needed, what is needed by development teams, what is needed by the business, and trying to provide the value that they need in the way that they need it.
Yeah, interesting. So we're starting to get into the idea that threat modeling, in fact, gives off value to multiple stakeholders. It's not just for the security teams themselves, and we'll begin to unpack that a little bit more. Lotfi, your thoughts as well on this? Any challenges that you see?
Yeah, I think we all agree that we have a problem with integrating security into the development of the software. Since security is not a feature that the company they can sell, so it is kind of in a product, you prefer to wait until whether there is an attack or not, and then you provide, and then we integrate solution, we solve the problems. In most of the scenario, that idea that the security is, or we have security is an add-on because it is a cost and it is not a profit, it is impacting doing security in general, doing security the correct way, including integrating threat modeling. So cost-benefit perspective is an important thing. I would agree also, I agree with my colleagues on the fact that developers, they update their software, but they do not update the documentation. So you would not find, while they do design, let's say every sprint, they have that 1 hour, 1 day, they spend 1 day to design a solution, they actually do not reflect that on the documentation, including the DFD. That said, so in many of the projects that we analyze, the architectural documents are not updated, although it is possible to do it. One thing is for the time perspective, so the loss of time. The second thing that we found a lot in the study is the awareness about the value of threat modeling. In the study that we have done, in the empirical study that we have done, the developers, they are aware about the value of using code analysis to track vulnerability. But it has been very rare that developers already do threat modeling. And if they do it, then there is an expert that is going to do the threat modeling. They have an expert that does the threat modeling at the beginning of the project. The developers are not aware of the value of threat modeling, and that the threat model of a software, of a system, changes as the project evolves. So one important thing to work on is to raise the awareness of the change of the landscape of the threats of the software as it evolves. This is not only static code analysis that you run and you can detect buffer overflow, cross-site scripting. Those are important. Access control and so on, things that needs to be addressed. I would so from tooling perspective, based on the study that we have done with the company, they innovate on the tooling perspective. In threat modeling, a lot of people, they do it even on a Word document. So they're creative, they develop their own custom solutions. So I would not say that they have really a big challenge with the tooling. Obviously, they could get better service when they use good tools. So they can identify most of the threats. They can check the security status of their software. But still, at least there are the basic things. So those are the main challenge that we have seen in the last, in the empirical study that we have done in the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. Yeah, sorry. Was there another comment someone had?
Actually, I would like to add a few more thoughts what Lotfi added. I really agree with Lotfi.
Yeah.
Another thing Lotfi brought up, good topic here. Sometimes we don't really think about the mitigation strategies in the threat modeling concept we do, which is kind of, for me, it's a lack of threat modeling things we do. Like Lotfi said, a great thing, like static analysis is an example. Yes, we will do static analysis, what I've been hearing in my implementation. How much we will do the static analysis for what? We rely a lot of static analysis, dynamic analysis tools in what is DevOps is offering with the pipeline perspective, but we don't know what is enough. What really relevant to our mitigation strategies that we are trying to put a threat in it. So I think there is a lack of threat modeling we do or the organization does. It is not as addressing what the developer needs. It is not really addressing what the developer need to know on their stories and epics. They didn't know about how much I can do static analysis for what. What is the impact for me, as an example? Or what type of security stories I have to write it goes back to for me, threat modeling, again, should give some information for developers or the Scrum Master or the PI plan or the program planning person or the product owner, some information that can be translated into the DevOps environment. People can follow it. Maybe you can add it as not as threat modeling is not done in a way that the DevOps people or DevOps organization can use it.
Mm-hmm. So as we produce something, it's just
Right.
the output is not is not immediately usable. by our DevOps teams, for example. Now, hold on a second. You brought something up, and I want to pause. I want to unpack this for a moment. All right, hold on. Let's take a look and let's see what we have here. You talked about threat modeling, and then you started to go down the path of code scanning. So there are some teams that may think that if we go and we run a code scan, that suddenly, this is going to make ourselves more secure. I think it's worthwhile just to just for a moment talk about what we mean when we say threats in the context of security, right? Is it enough for us to run a code scan or not? And I know that we're digressing, but that's the nature of the streaming webinars that we do. It could go in any number of different directions. And I'd like us to unpack this a little bit. Is it enough for a team to go in and say, we're going to do a code scan, and then, because we need a security expert to do threat modeling, we don't have enough security experts. I'm just going to automate this by using a code scan. Is there a flaw in that type of thinking? Is there something else that can come out of that? Because it has come up in our discussion right now, and I'd like us to take that head on. So, panelists, any thoughts around this? Simone, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important topic. What should we do? And sometimes I have to say that this confusion is also our fault as security experts. The different tools have each its own purpose, and we needed to recognize the purpose. The static analysis tool has the purpose of analyzing the code and to identify some typical flows in the code itself. And it's not about the design of the solution. There are the dynamic application security testing tools, which analyze how the application performs, not from a performance perspective, but from a security perspective, how it handles requests that may change, may be different from the expected, what is expected, and so on. Each one of those tools will provide different angles, different type of issues, sometimes not the same issues. And there are many other types. Now, it's not the place to discuss all the different type of tools, but the specific characteristic of threat modeling is that it focuses on the design of the solution. And it's mainly a conceptual exercise over the design. This characteristic is fundamental because it's the first technique, the first methodology that you can apply. You don't need to have a single line of code. Every threat model I do doesn't require a code. I don't want to see the code, okay, of the application. I want to discuss with the architects about its architecture and to analyze how it works and to understand what are the potential flows. So this can be done very early. And there are studies, perhaps a little old, but there are studies saying to us that if we are able to identify an issue very early during the development process, we can save a lot of money. The cost of identifying the same issue when it's late, when it's in production, the solution may be 40 times higher, 100 times higher, depends on the study. So it is significantly higher. I would add to that the fact that I can redesign a system will allow to have different, more powerful design options, mitigation controls in place. So this tends to be also much more effective. And one angle to that is that if I do that when I'm rushing, I cannot take in account the consequences of my mitigation. Most mitigations I can put in place represent an extension of the attack surface themselves. So they increase the risk. Yes, they reduce the risk, but also they may increase the risk. So this needs to be considered the side effect that they bring. And all of that can be done via threat modeling. Now, why it's our fault that there is this confusion? Because sometimes when we do threat modeling, we tend to insert issues like SQL injection. And this is not an issue that threat modeling should address. SQL injection depends on how I write the code. So this needs to be moved to where it can be detected more efficiently. And we need to focus on the value, to demonstrate the value of the threat model and focusing on its specific characteristics.
Mm-hmm. And so this begins the discussion around threats and vulnerabilities and what are the differences between the two and things like that. But hold that thought for a moment.
I have a couple of things to say that I like that what you're going at. I'm going to put my DevOps hat, if that's okay. I don't want to hijack the
Yeah, go ahead, Hassan.
When I put my DevOps hat, I know when I said at the beginning, static analysis perspective, that is, I agree with this, Simone. We are not analyzing the code with the threat model perspective. However, outputs of threat modeling as a mitigation will help to identify what are the possible attacks that we have to focus on. We're not really solving SQL injection, but we are saying that there is a SQL injection problem may happen in your architecture because you have a database that you're using it that might be potential threat in a database. Attackers may use SQL injection. Now the developer's job to work in the code perspective, fix the SQL injection in the code level. So output of threat modeling really helping the developer to use that. I think there is a disconnect over there because usually, again, yes, our intent to build up a secure system. That's what we are trying to do threat modeling go, right? We would like to build up a resilient and secure systems. What the mechanics are, when we look at the mechanics, like let's start from the shift left concept, our goal to build up a resilient system, secure system. What are we going to do? Of course, like typical DevOps mindset, we can run static analysis to build up security code. But the question is here, we don't know which one is relevant to our architecture elements. Because based on the vulnerabilities, there are two main elements to fix the vulnerabilities. It's a defect, basically. Defect is based on the design problems we may see. We may see some bug or the flaw in the bug or any type of errors in the code level. There's two elements here. Threat modeling for me is covering both. There is a design element. We look at architecture perspective, and also we are giving the typical attack vectors as part of our requirements. Again, I'm connecting my DevOps world thinking. I need to know as the developers and architects or the Scrum Master, what is my security features I'm going to work on it? What is my security problems I'm going to work on it for the system that I am working on that topic? Who's going to tell me? That's the problem I'm trying to really solve in DevOps world.
Hassan, while I agree with you, I would like to note that when you say as part of the threat model, well, you have a database, therefore you may have a SQL injection. The answer may be, so what? This is something that is already known, but it's not improving the posture of the application. It's not useful. What instead should be done is to focus on other type of issues on the solution. This is where threat modeling provides the value. What I'm saying is that those issues like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and so on, they are still important, extremely important. I'm not downplaying them. But there are other approaches which are much more efficient in handling those. So what I typically do when I do a threat model is to ask, are you validating the input? How are you validating the input? Are you going to use regular expressions? Are you, if you identify something that is not okay, are you raising events and perhaps alerts? Are you following up on those alerts? So those type of questions, this is something that typically cannot be addressed with the static analysis and where I can provide more value.
Yeah, and you're not getting into solutioning at the threat modeling stage. You're opening up the discussion, and maybe you could use a parameterized query, for example, which might work in one situation, but in another, maybe that's not the best thing to do. It might be cost prohibitive, or there could be many other things, and hence the whole discussion on value. Right. Hold that thought, because we're going to get into different layers and different stakeholders. Oh my, we only have 1 hour for this. Lotfi, you have anything that you want to add to this discussion right now? We were talking about code scanning. And sometimes there's a misconception that if you do code scanning, that's good enough. But here we're talking about threat modeling. So we talked about shifting left. We talked about opening up the discussion to help people understand why, where some of the things that a code scan might miss, for example. Not to say code scanning is bad. It's not. It's a good thing. We need it, right? But let's not mix the two up or say it's one or the other. Lotfi, your thoughts?
Few years ago, 8 years ago, we interviewed the security expert of an open source for e-commerce, and we thought, well, the people that we talk to, they say, well, actually, code analysis, it already addresses a lot of security things. Why should I do threat modeling? Mm-hmm. And we interviewed a security expert of an open source of an e-commerce, and our question was, well, when you are talking about language or when you are talking about code, we talk about code analysis because you're going to analyze static code analysis or dynamic code analysis. You're going to identify vulnerability. When we talk about design, what do you do? And as far as I remember, so they spend already a lot of time to analyze the impact of each user story on access control. They do that through discussions. So they have kind of chart, but that chart, so it stays there. And they talk about whenever they decide on implementing a new feature, they spend a lot of time to talk about access control. Access control is not going to be catched, or at least at that point, it's not catched by code analysis. So code analysis doesn't know when they have a new feature that it is going to impact the access control. It is possible they implement the feature, then they provide a way to the attacker to bypass the existing access control. That's the main reason. So I think the first time that we encountered that was, why would code analysis not sufficient? And the answer was, well, it is possible to implement new features, and then you give the attacker the opportunity to bypass existing access control mechanisms. So you create a flow, and that is one. We've seen in the recent years in our study especially on existing open source software, that when people, like for example, software on autonomous driving, people, they keep continuing adding features, and then they don't update the documentation. You find that you have a V2X component. It is not in the architecture. You don't know whether the data that you are receiving about the cars around are clean or not. You don't know whether the image that you are going to process for the autonomous driving are good image, or actually there are attacks there. The security expert basically did not get a chance. There is no evidence that they got a chance to assess the threats that come with a full component, V2X. For 10 years, people, they work about the threats for V2X, and then you have open source, you have a V2X component, and it was not in the architecture even. It's not on the DFD diagram. So, and there is a lot of threats over there, as I explained. So those are examples of cases where we have seen the value of, let's say, design-based threat that exploit design flows, right?
That's great. Excellent. That sounds good. So now let's get back to our discussion, because we just unpacked the value of threats, the value of mitigations or countermeasures, looking at vulnerabilities, trying to make sure we can catch these things as early as possible. And so far, we've identified what are the challenges. If we need to inject threat modeling into our DevSecOps pipelines, sometimes it's done as a siloed activity. It doesn't integrate well. The artifacts aren't easily translatable. Yet at the same time, we need to try to make sure that the development, the development pipeline, the release pipeline itself does accommodate things that are related to the threats. And it's not a one-time thing, as we identified. It's something we want to have being done on a continuous basis. So we come back in line with the cadence of how we're releasing things, right? So given all these challenges, now we can't just stop there. There has to be a set of things that we can do, actionable things, to help us to now address what some of these challenges are. And I'd like to start to unpack this with the time that we've got remaining at this point. How do we now take these challenges, knowing what they are, eyes open, and saying, okay, there are definitely ways that we can inject things in, and perhaps we will even outline what are some of the limitations that we have today. But there's definitely a trend to try to bring threat modeling into DevSecOps and to try to automate as much as possible. But let me maybe start with you, Simone. Can you offer your thoughts based on your experience around actionable steps that can be taken to help bring and integrate threat modeling into DevSecOps?
Well, the first thing that we should consider is what threat modeling. We have a lot of ways of doing threat modeling, and this is the first element. For example, I know that a lot of practitioners, some very famous practitioners, love to do threat modeling as a workshop, really interactive activity with the development teams. And then the various activities become naturally something to be inserted in the backlog. There are other teams which adopt a different methodology. I adopt a different methodology personally in my exercise, where with the first, essentially, the activities, the threat modeling activities are something done by the team, including developers, including architects. Everyone participate with the threat model that I usually do. Essentially, it's a much more guided experience where you have the expert leading the activity, interviewing, and essentially identifying the different potential problems. This type of threat model typically tends to identify a lot of different findings, and over the time, it tends to create a lot of material, and inserting that material inside the backlog, which is how you make that material actionable, can be a nightmare. So in the past, this was something very difficult to achieve. And in that, I will say tools play a major role in making your life simpler or more complicated. What I'm trying to do right now with inside Microsoft with the other colleagues is also to go beyond the simple integration. The simplest integration we may have is to take threats identified by some tool, put them in the backlog, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And can I show an example using
Yeah,
my...
absolutely. I will stop sharing, and you're
Just,
welcome to share your screen. Absolutely.
I think it may be easier.
Mm-hmm.
So while
can you
Simone is
see?
bringing, can I chime a little bit here?
Yes, please.
As bringing the screen, I think we have to really understand the DevOps principle as well. We said DevOps is based on the communication and the collaborations. That is also including the threat modeling team as well. We may be thinking that we don't have enough people to attend. We have to communicate. The communication doesn't mean everybody has to be in the same room every time. We have to really share the output. We have to share the content. We have to share the knowledge with other team members, developers and architects, Scrum Master, or the dev lead, or the security person. This is about the sharing that we are missing. That's really important to build up a team effort. The team effort is really crucial to adding the DevOps context. We don't want to just get a dev only. We don't want to get the architect only. Threat modeler should be somehow part of the team, are working together, or at least sharing the common platform, or sharing the same infrastructure. These are the things that we should be sharing and talking in. It's really important. Okay, Simone.
Absolutely true. I totally agree. The fact that the activity is to be led by an expert doesn't mean that it should not be used the result as a way to foster communication and a conversation and a dialogue with the security team and with the developers, with the architects, with the product owner. Instead, it must be at the center of this. So here you see just a very empty project on Azure DevOps, and I have here already prepared a threat model. This tool that you can see is Threat Manager Studio, which is the tool that I have developed. And here you see the threat model related to that tool. So nothing particularly fancy. But the point is, it already identifies a series of threats. And for each threat, it identifies mitigations, which may be done. Now, the next step is to bring those mitigations and to move those mitigations inside the backlog. So what I'm going to show you is exactly this activity, how to integrate, how to bring inside under this epic the different mitigations. So this tool allows to define the integration based on, in this case, on Azure DevOps. And it starts with inserting the link. And I have already inserted the access token. This is taken from the registry. And it's encrypted using the API for the user. So I can now select the project where I want to integrate. I need to configure. And the configuration starts saying what is the parent node. And you have seen here that I have this node I want to create under this epic. So but I have to put just the first 3 letters, and it has identified already that one, and that it is an epic. Under the epic, I have features that need to be created. So I want to create those features with a tag, which is threat modeling already set. And here you see the status retrieved from the Azure DevOps, and I have some known states that are managed by the tool, which are mapped to the states from Azure DevOps.
Simona, sorry to interrupt here. I'm assuming that we are creating the planning session right now. I'm assuming like we are creating some actions under the epics.
Yes.
That's kind of a first planning things connected with this in the DevOps environment.
Yeah, getting it into the DevOps pipelines.
Right.
Yeah. So essentially, I have a few mitigations here, and what I can do is exactly that. I can select one. I can say, okay, I create this, and when I create this already creates under the epic the features that I have created. So now I can do things, the usual stuff. It's the experience is not anything different from what you would do as a developer. So now, for example, I can say, okay, I take this and I can put a comment. I want to do this and save. I can return to the tool, and what I can do is synchronize. So now that the tool knows that this has started to be done. And you see that the status, also the activity that previously was proposed as changed to planned, and they have the comment. So now that the developer continues developing this and finishes, closes, when I return to my tool, I can refresh, and now it's done. And the tool knows that it's implemented. So now the severity of the threat that is addressed by this mitigation can change. And in fact, I can also analyze the severity and can show with the dashboard like this one, how things change per effect of that mitigation. So this is essentially a way to have a bi-directional integration with Azure DevOps. And this is just the first idea. So creating elements from the threat modeling tool towards the system, towards Azure DevOps, for instance, and then get feedbacks related to what has been done and change the severity, change the status of the threats. But we can do more. We can align security requirements. We can understand, match the information that is present on the threat model with information in Azure DevOps to understand if we are missing anything. And we know that if we miss anything, pieces of the solution or threats, we are having potential problems. And so this is just a starting point.
Yeah, it's a good point to just kind of bring out. This is how we integrate taking security concepts and pushing them through into the pipelines. There is a translation that happens. It is not just at the policy level, but it goes down to an atomic story that DevOps teams can now use and go all the way through, and they've got a test that they can test against. And in there lies the integration, which gives us the ability to close off those threats. So Lotfi, you've been quiet for a bit. Do you have any thoughts, anything else in terms of actionable steps from your perspective?
I think what Simone brought here on the integration of threat modeling into the process by pushing user stories and controlling when they closed is very important. So from process perspective, this is very important. The second aspect that I want to emphasize is the awareness. And we talked about collaboration between the threat model and the different developers and so on. Based on my experience, when the developer understand or get the mindset of attacker, it really helps a lot on identifying the real threats, the real things, real weaknesses of a system. So it is important to involve the threat modeling, to involve the developers in the threat modeling, to have them think about attacks. At the end of the day, the investor in the software, they are interested about the outcome, what they're going to gain out of that software. And if the major attacks, potential threats are addressed, then that would reduce the cost of attacks, which is for several major companies. They value that. So those threats will be understood more by the developer, will be known more by the developers when they understand the value of threat modeling or what is threat modeling, rather than by security experts who are not familiar with the business of the application. They can understand it from a diagram, but that they have less. The threats that they're going to come with are less important.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Lotfi, you brought up this idea of an attacker's mindset. All right, let's have a discussion here. Attacker's mindset. What exactly is that? We're used to doing development. We code, we test, we do continuous integration, we do all these things. What does it mean when we talk about having an attacker's mindset? How is that different? Simone, you want to take this one on to start with?
Yeah, frankly, I don't think that it's possible for the rest of us to achieve an attacker mindset. Because just let's consider this: there is not single attacker. There are a lot of attackers. There is the nation state attacker that everyone fears. There is the script kiddie, which doesn't know anything besides Google. And in the middle, there are a lot of different types of attackers. At the end of the day, what does it matter to you is not about the generic attacker, but who is the attacker that is trying to compromise you. And at the same time, you have many. So it's a really complicated job to do that. So what really matters from my point of view as a threat modeler is to have a critical mindset. So never assume, and be self-critical, and never be satisfied with what you do. Try to understand everything. Try to go in depth. And if you don't know something, accept it. Understand what you do not know. Study what you do not know. In fact, I have a lot of training with colleagues, and some of them tell me, well, threat modeling is too hard because I feel like I'm not I'm working in a state of not being comfortable at any time. I see a lot of systems, and everything I see is something I don't know. So how can I do that? And there are techniques. First of all, be smart about that. Do a scoping call. Try to understand what is there, what are the main themes. Do your study. And then when you do the threat model, never do that in a single run, because you will find more questions than answers. Do a first run, wait some time, study, analyze, use that time, and then do a second run, a second call, having go in depth. And this is about, again, being critical, being self-critical, and adopt an holistic approach.
Yep. Hassan, you have thoughts on this?
I have two go-backs. I'm going to come back to attacker mindset a little bit late. Let's open up what Simone did in the presentation, and then previous discussion, we talked about the static analysis. Like, going to connect the dots. In the threat model, we said it should be actionable. We have to create some planning perspective for us. We need to have, as the DevOps team, as an organization, I have to allocate my time as an engineer to work on the specific requirements. That's what has been created from the tool perspective, told me, here is your security requirements technique. Here is the possible threat you have to address. It was put into my planning, which is the first step. Goes back to what Lotfi said. Business owners need to know how much I'm going to spend the time. That has to be considered at the planning phase. Usually security in the DevOps world, it is after the fact. We are trying to address after the fact by relying on the tools, which we will, again, we're not against the tools, we should, but we kind of late in the game. Now we are putting a planning into our exercise. We have to plan. Going back to the static analysis or many other security testing tool, we may be doing it. So that's kind of based on what the planning says for us. That's what the epics and stories is really telling us. That's a connectivity piece. That was the question we have asked. What really we have to do static now for what? We have to do because of that reason. Here's we have to address mitigation. Again, it's not a one way. There is an architectural consideration we have to think about it. At least we are creating some connectivities what the tool is generating for us. That's connection piece has been created. Going back to the attacker mindset, I always say to my students, yes, we have the attacker mindset. I agree it's really challenging. It is requiring a lot of knowledge. At least giving some behavioral thoughts for the developers and architect. They have to think about there is a security requirements. Again, this is difficult, but at least they have to be aware of there is a security requirements here. There is a code that I have to produce as a developer that might be some security vulnerabilities in it. Give the same mindset. Yes, how much different attack vectors, how much difficulties we may see. I'm hoping that threat modeling tool will help us, the concept will help us lay out the possible threats at least. That goes back to our planning. Threat modeling tool tell me these are the possible attacks may be seeing that. How are we going to implement in an environment? It is more the perception for developer level. Developer will say, yes, there is a potential problem here. That's attacker mindset for me. Again, it's challenging. At least give some cultural aspect of it because, again, developer always looking for write the code, but usually developer has no time to think about that. So I'm hoping that with planning perspective, we can help them to think about it at least. We can help them to plan accordingly because we are trying to address it early. How are we going to address early in life cycle if you don't know it? Threat modeling will let us know there is a problem here and then try to address those problems in the life cycle.
Yeah. That's interesting. There's so much. I wish we had another hour. We could go and talk about threat identification. We could talk about mitigations and prioritizing and categorization and classification. I mean, maybe we'll do another one, folks. If there's another webinar that you'd like to see, please do let us know. Happy to do that. But I would like to inch us forward now, and I want to talk about communicating, because we talked about this, right? On the one hand, if we, let's say, produce a data flow diagram, it's wonderful. It helps us understand the system. Is it something that we can then take and put in front of, let's say, a manager and say, here you go, this is what we need to do? I mean, how do we begin to communicate this effectively? And one approach could be that we take this in layers. We have a very abstract layer. It still gives us an idea of where the threats are, what the the recommended mitigations might be. And then we dig one step deeper and we go deeper. And depending on who the audience is, they can view things from a different perspective. And I'd like us to talk a little bit about that. How do we take all of this analysis in keeping in line with this idea of value creation? The concept of value will be different depending on who we're going to talk to. So how do we now take this, and how do we express this in a way that is meaningful to people? So Simone, you want to take that on? I see you nodding your head. So you've got some thoughts on this. Let's do it.
Absolutely. That's I totally agree with what you're saying, Altaz. This is a concern, a dual concern of mine, frankly. I think that every time you have to interact with someone, the first thing that you need to understand is what does matter to that person. Threat modeling as may play a powerful role, and I've seen that in creating conversation with the security teams, with the development teams, with the business stakeholder, the product owners, and essentially with everyone inside the organization which may be interested in the solution and in managing the risk for that solution. You need to focus on what doesn't matter. The diagram actually matters to us who created the threat model, and that's it. Because they are a way for us to represent our knowledge and to check easily if our knowledge is mistaken or not. What I've seen also is that it provides a good platform to annotate, to add information related to the question we asked, related to the answer received. So this creates also the possibility for others who would want to take over the threat model at a later stage to use this sort of knowledge because it's present in a structured way. But that's it. That's what matters to them. What matters to the developers? To the developers they want to understand what they need to do. Mm-hmm. Nothing else matters. What they need to do. And this means the backlog. You need to provide the backlog, and that's it. And they do not care about anything else. Instead, the business decision maker, product owners, what matters is to have information to make decisions. They want to have control over those decisions. They want to have the information related to risks. They want to have information related to how much they would lose by accepting those risks, or what are the consequences of implementing some mitigation. And we need to provide that information in a way that is easily understandable. So that's not a diagram. That's not the backlog. That's charts, dashboards, a completely different way of representing. And what I've seen is that even security may have a very important impact with that, very important value. And having the possibility to communicate with all of them is extremely important. For example, with security, it allows to eliminate all those blockers that typically we face during the development of projects and make and delay our deployment in production.
Yeah, makes sense. Lotfi, you have some thoughts on this? Communicating to stakeholders?
Communication is for threat modeling is very important. I heard here talk about my first experience with threat modeling. I applied a taxonomy, and I had a big document where I had spoofing and so on, and I went to a meeting and started doing the presentation. By the end of the presentation, so most of the people, they were standing between developers, senior developers, the investors, and so on. They looked at what is this laundry list. So having a laundry list does not help. And at the end of the meeting, that was my first experience, and it was really very bad. So, but by that end of the meeting, so the idea came: what should I do about this? What is the most important thing? And then we decided what is the impost. So it was for them, it is important to have the system as a secure system, and we needed to have actions. So we came to the value of the also what is important, which one I am going to implement. So having a list is good, but I want to be secure. So I want to have action and have the translation from threats to implementation that can get the results. And I would agree also that the issue of mindset is very important. So people, they need to understand the value of attacks. Simone came to you are doing prevention from home, or you are trying to protect from home. From the state, potentially, you are not going to do anything. So there is a lot of people from the other side that they are smart, as you do, probably, or better. And but your goal, you have a given goal, and your goal is to protect your business. And what is the very important things to protect your business? I had come here to the communication. So I remember when the Heartbleed vulnerability showed up, it was called, hey, we implemented that feature. Are we secure? So everyone was anxious, right? Then at that time, people realize how the importance of security. So with just one thing, communication is very important. Threats should not be a laundry list, but they should provide. They should allow to have actions in order to have a secure system. And from the other side, also awareness of whether the investor, whether the developers, about the value of the threats is very important. Otherwise, there is no security.
Yeah, that's great. And I'd like to give Hassan an opportunity as well. Hassan, when it comes to communicating, we've got a couple of minutes left. We're running out of time. But if there's anything you can add in here around communicating to stakeholders.
I would like to bring another DevOps thought here. The communication is the fundamental principles on DevOps environment. We always say the continuous feedback. Continuous feedback is basically communicating a result that we capture from a pipeline, from the team, from all the stakeholders, including tools, to share those information with all stakeholders. That's a foundational concept. This is also true for threat modeling. And Simone did a great presentation. He looked at the result and then presented where we are, how we're doing well. This is basically the feedback mechanisms was established through the DevOps connectivities. So we brought the communication in the level of all the stakeholders. Sometimes developers would like to see a result in their sprint planning tools or their case management. Sometimes management would like to see the result in a dashboard. Typically, the communication depends on who we are asking, what thing they would like to see. But as the organization, we should be able to find a way to share the information in different ways. Sometimes sharing information through the Slack channel or the communication through any ChatOps application, or to get the result of the tool and output that result and make it a realistic, in fact, result, not a PowerPoint information that I'm talking about. Show the actual application or the code or the tool is presenting the output. It's more relevant for the people. Again, this is more about a continuous feedback perspective. We have to give the feedback on the stakeholder on a specific topic in the timely. Again, another important things, communication should be as timely. We don't want to delay the result a month later. We would like to get as quick as possible, as early as possible, share the information. It doesn't mean you have to go grab the people, but information should be available. People, they can take a look and come back and look at that data from the DevOps pipeline. I'm going to stop here. Looks like we hit the
Wonderful. That's great. And with that, I think we're going to bring this to a close. I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to come and to just be a part of this discussion today. Please do let us know if there's something else that you'd like to see in future webinars. Hassan has already suggested something, and let's keep the discussion going. Let's communicate via LinkedIn. Let's take a look at some other options that we've got where we might be able to do additional podcasts or things like that. Feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to collaborate with you. And with that, we'll bring today's session to a close. Thank you.
Thank you.